North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory joins me now from Scottsdale, Arizona, where he is attending the RGA meeting. Governor, good morning to you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
I remember having you on the day after the election, and basically you were touting the fact you were one of the few positive stories for the Republican Party in 2012 on Election Day. You won in a competitive state, competitive seat, despite President Obama was winning a second term quite handily. And you talked about that it's because of the tone of the campaign that you ran. And I guess now, a year later, it seems that even some Republicans in North Carolina are questioning the tone of your governance, that you're too confrontational as a governor. And when you, after Election Day, you thought that the voters actually rewarded you for not being so confrontational. Do I have these images correct?
Actually not, although in some ways I'm stepping on the toes of the status quo of both the Republicans and Democrats, mainly Democrats who have been in control of state government for over 25 years. So I'm having to make some very, very difficult decisions to right the ship in North Carolina and to bring jobs back in North Carolina, just like Chris Christie had to do in New Jersey, just like John Kasich had to do in Ohio, just like Scott Walker had to do in Wisconsin. I'm having to make those short-term, painful decisions for long-term positive results for our state. And that's why I think the leadership for our nation needs to come out of the states, because we in the governorships are willing to make the tough decisions, which frankly steps on the toes of both the right and the left.
Well, let me ask you this. What part of voter ID laws does that have to do with bringing jobs to North Carolina? Why pursue that, which is a very divisive issue in your state?
Well, actually, it's 80% approval in my state, so it's not as divisive as the national media puts on it. In fact, our laws are much more liberal than even the state of New York. The voter IDs are common sense. We require an ID to get Sudafed in North Carolina, to get food stamps in North Carolina. To have a basic ID to vote is common sense laws that are available, I think, in over 32 states in the United States of America. So I think some of the voter ID controversy is more created than real on the ground.
Well, all right. So let's set aside the voter ID. Why then push for shortening early voting? Why push for this issue of not having same-day voter registration? I say that because you sit there, voter ID, sure. You can make the voter ID argument. Well, then why also try to curtail early voting? It's hard not to look at it and say, well, geez, Republicans are getting whipped in early voting, and that's why they don't want early voting.
Well, first of all, we didn't shorten early voting. We compacted the calendar, but we're going to have the same hours in which polls are open in early voting, and we're going to have more polls available. So it's going to be almost identical. It's just the schedule has changed. The critics are kind of using that line when, in fact, the legislation does not shorten the hours for early voting. And by the way, states like New York have no early voting, so it's kind of ironic that Eric Holder is suing us and not suing the state of New York. So I think it's more about politics there than anything else. And by the way, we also closed some lobbying rules. So is that politics on your side? I mean, there've been plenty. It's not political.
No, this is not political at all. You don't see any political benefit for the Republicans in these more restrictive laws.
No, actually, if you survey, most Democrats also agree with our laws and voter ID. So I think it's common sense laws, and I think it's much ado about nothing and trying to protect the integrity of the voter booth. But where I'm spending my time on is recruiting businesses and bringing jobs in North Carolina. And we were one of the only states in the United States that has major tax reform, because our tax code was 60 years old, and my corporate tax and my income tax was higher than Virginia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. So Nikki Haley, Bill Haslam, and Governor McDonald in Virginia were beating me for jobs, and my goal is to beat all the states for jobs, whether it be Republican or Democratic governor states. And in fact, I was in California yesterday looking for jobs for North Carolina and California. So that's where most focus is in, and that's where 90% of my time is spent on. And that's why I think Chris Christie or Mark Walker or Bobby Jindal or others are or Rick Perry would be great candidates.
Let me ask you this question here. Respond to Edwin Peacock. He lost, the Republican candidate who lost the Charlotte mayor's race. Charlotte, obviously, it's some city you're very familiar with. And he said your unpopularity was a contributing factor. He said this: what they would ask me is, talking about voters, are you going to be another Pat McCrory? I do think it was a contributory factor. This was the anti-McCrory, anti-legislature sentiment. How do you respond to your fellow Republicans?
Well, I do have some anti-Pat McCrory from both Republicans and Democrats. And I did as mayor, but I was reelected as mayor of Charlotte 7 times. I was the longest-serving mayor of a large city with more Democrats than Republicans. So it's very much similar to Chris Christie being governor of New Jersey. But when I first came in as governor, I needed to change some things very quickly because we were the 5th highest unemployment state in the country. And I needed to deal with some financial issues and some job issues in North Carolina. And a mark of a true leader is making the tough decisions. And I'm doing just that. And our polls are coming back up. And I think you're seeing this, you know, Scott Walker in Wisconsin had protesters. I had protesters.
Right.
But once you get through that process, they see you're willing to make the tough decisions.
All right, Pat McCrory, I got to leave it there. I wanted to talk about the abortion issue. I know that's become a hot-button issue there. Hopefully we'll get you back another time. Governor, thanks for coming on this morning.
I'd love to be. Thank you very much.